Thank you very much. So as everybody in this room knows very well, scholarly publishing and publishing more broadly has evolved continuously when confronted with new technologies and new challenges. This is not a new thing, but the pace of change is increasing rapidly, and there's no sign of it slowing down. In fact, quite the contrary. So those involved in society publishing, researchers, members, editors, publishers, grapple with changing technologies, with open access, with social media, with ethical issues, including issues of diversity and inclusion, just to name a few. We have a global millennial workforce, as we've seen this morning, that's emerging with new values, facing economic uncertainty and geopolitical instability. These are tomorrow's and even today's leaders. So in this panel, we're really fortunate to have speakers from a broad spectrum of scholarly publishing and society publishing. We're going to hear from the perspective of the researcher, collaborator, and program manager, from the scientist, professor, associate dean, and editor-in-chief, from the vice president and publisher, and from the publishing manager, an emerging leader in publishing and blogger. So as we all know, developing skills of tomorrow's leaders is critical. But what skills are most essential in the broad spectrum of scholarly publishing, and how are new leaders developed, and what does this new leadership look like? So our distinguished panelists will reflect on their backgrounds as mentors, as mentees, as leaders, with a focus on lessons learned and how it applies to this ever-changing industry. So we'll start with David Sampson, Vice President and Publisher of Publishing at the American Society of Clinical Oncology, where he's responsible for the Society's journal and scientific meeting publications and licensing. Prior to joining ASCO in 2013, he was Executive Publisher in Elsevier's Health Science Journals Division, where he had P&L responsibility for a global portfolio of more than 20 society-owned proprietary journals. He also worked at Lippincott Williams and Wilkins in various leadership roles, including 5 years as managing director of its Asia office in Hong Kong, and he was executive vice president at Conference Archives, which is now part of Co-Truman Technologies. So David, the American Society of Clinical Oncology has exemplary programs in helping to ensure that new leaders can be fully represented in the society. Can you talk a little bit about how you grow and develop your talent both internally and externally so that your business continues to grow? And how does ASCO build strong editorial leadership?
Sure, thanks, John. And it's a mouthful, so you can just say ASCO. It's a little shorter than ASCO. So I'll talk about what ASCO does from three perspectives. You mentioned, internally and externally, and what we do at a society level for developing member leadership, and then what we do at a staff level internally, and then lastly, what we do for our publishing program. So there's a lot that we do. I'm not going to be able to talk about all of the different programs, but I certainly encourage questions, and during networking you can ask me additional questions. But from a membership perspective and society leadership perspective, we have something called the Leadership Development Program, and this is an annual program that is through application, a very competitive application process. And it's targeted toward early career and mid-career professionals in oncology. And the goal of this program is to help identify leaders so that they can, one, learn more about ASCO, and secondly, to enhance and develop their leadership skills. And ultimately, we want participants in this program to advance to leadership positions within the society. So we select 16 participants, divide them up into 4 different teams. Each team is assigned a senior mentor. And this is a year-long program. Each of the teams is then assigned a research project, and the research projects are bubbled up through staff and through volunteer committees. And then so this group or these teams work on this research project throughout the year, which requires 3 in-person meetings as well as biweekly calls. And then they present the results of their research project at our board meeting that's tied to our annual scientific meeting. But when they meet face-to-face in the summer, in the fall, and in the spring, they not only work on their research project, but ASCO teaches them different skills related to leadership, whether it be conflict resolution, media training. Media training is incredibly important if you're going to rise to a leadership position within an organization. They also receive skills in communication, skills training and advocacy training, and they also visit Congress. They go with senior volunteers, senior members to visit the halls of Congress, and they learn about what advocacy and health policy is all about. So from the staff level, we have a very mature mentorship program, and this, again, is through an application process. And we match mentors with mentees in a year-long program. And each year, we have about 15% of our staff participating in this mentor-mentee program. And our HR group provides the mentors and the mentees with a toolkit, essentially, that gives them a framework for having regular meetings to address certain issues around professional development, conflict resolution, how to advance one's career, networking, and what we see are mentees who then decide, wow, that was a great program for me, I want to be a mentor. And we see individuals who are mentors in multiple years. So this is, I think, a very important project and program for ASCO to build connections and especially to develop junior staff. Lastly, on the publishing side, and this is really not new, and I basically copied this from a journal that I used to work on at Elsevier called the Annals of Emergency Medicine, and they had a residency journals editorial fellowship. And so we've adapted that program for each of our 5 journals, and again, through an application process. And I'm always amazed at how many applications we get to this program, but each journal then tailors their individual program, working with an early career oncology fellow or the equivalent internationally. And this is about teaching them the peer review process, the nuts and bolts of publishing. We assign them to an editor or an associate editor, and they are assigned papers throughout the year to review, and then that editor or associate editor critiques their review and gives them pointers. In conclusion, this is also a train-the-trainer model where we expect these individuals to go back to their institutions and to convey what they learn to their colleagues. And this is especially important internationally. And so for one of our journals, Journal of Global Oncology, we're intentional in bringing in fellows from developing nations. That's it.
Thank you, David. That's a great segue into our next question. So Karin Lilja is Scientific Program Manager at Breast Cancer Research Foundation. Karin manages BCRF's annual grants programs, as well as special projects within the BCRF Breast Cancer Research Grants portfolio. She obtained her PhD from NYU Sackler Institute of Graduate Biomedical Sciences in 2018, where she investigated mechanisms regulating muscle stem cells. She moved to the United States from Sweden in 2008, representing Uppsala University as an exchange student at Cornell University. Prior to joining BCRF in September 2018, Karin worked with a team of scientists at NYU Langone's Health Pathology Department to perform big data analyses aimed at discovering new melanoma treatments. Karin, one of the hallmarks of leadership needed today and in the future is an international perspective. You've participated in an international exchange program that has been one of the important facets of your career. Can you discuss briefly why it's important to have international experience and how it's framed your approach to research, publishing, and leadership?
Thank you. So I think one of the important aspects of that is truly that it allows you to define where you want your career path to go forward. So the way that the exchange programs from Uppsala University actually works is that you are provided a list of different universities that they provide an exchange program with, for which you have to go through their curriculum and justify why you would be a good fit for that particular university and how their portfolio and their curriculum could really fit where you want to take your career in terms of the next step. I was really fortunate to be able to go to Cornell University specifically, and was in particular also interested in going there because of a stem cell biology class that they hosted, and I ended up actually working with the professor who started that program and that course. And I think beyond being able to interact with American students, the international program also allows you to get a window to view educational programs, not only how they work in the States, but through the exchange programs allow you to give a window, they give you a window to understand how different educational programs work all over the world, because they bring together those students on the same space. So I think in terms of leadership, it's making sure that you can justify what your end goals would be. As an international student, you also have to justify the time for being away from home and justifying the time and commitment for visa applications and so forth, and making sure that the investigators that you work with or the curriculum that you take, that brings value also to them. So that's how I view it. I don't know if that provides.
Thank you. So William B. Tolman is Professor, Department of Chemistry, and Associate Dean, Arts and Scientists at Washington University in St. Louis. He served as Associate Editor of the American Chemical Society journal Inorganic Chemistry from 2007 to 2012 and was appointed Editor-in-Chief in 2013. He has a PhD from the University of California, Berkeley, and was a postdoctoral fellow at Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Among the honors he's received are the NSF National Young Investigator, Camille and Henry Dreyfus Foundation Teacher Scholar, and Alfred P. Stone's Foundation Awards, and a research award from the Humboldt Foundation, as well as the ACS Award for Distinguished Service in the Advancement of Inorganic Chemistry. Bill, as young scientists and researchers enter the profession, they must deal with many different and complex issues, from grant writing and funding to making sure research is rigorous, ethical, and replicable, to tenure and promotion in a landscape of diminishing tenure positions. Can you discuss how you work at your university to develop new academic leaders? What's the role of publishing in this development? And what are some of the challenges in young researchers developing into new editors? And finally, what can and what should society publishers do to enable the development of future editors and editor-in-chief?
Well, thanks, John. That's a lot of questions to answer in 2 minutes, so I'm not sure I can answer all of them. But what I can try to address is a few key points. So first of all, as an academic in the room, I think I need to emphasize that what it is we do is develop new leaders. I mean, this is our job. This is our primary role as a researcher and a teacher at a university. And research is teaching, and so research is a big part of all of that. In terms of how we work at our university to develop new academic leaders, I think there's basically two thrusts. One is, of course, the students themselves, and of course, we do direct mentorship of students as research advisors and as teachers. But being a mentor is not just about research, and I think that's where it impacts most upon publishing. It means also things like career advice, teaching students how to be good managers, but most importantly, one of the big issues now in graduate education is teaching graduate students to be much better communicators of their science and their research to the broader community, and that's where I think training for getting involved in publishing is most impactful. We also, of course, do a lot of work to develop our faculty. So faculty development and getting faculty to be involved in publishing and editing is a big job. Nowadays, at most academic institutions, faculty mentorship is much more institutionalized than it used to be. It used to be pretty ad hoc. It's much less ad hoc these days. So there's institutional programs, workshops that help faculty be better at everything that they do. And without getting into all the details. The third thing I'd like to say has to do with your question about what can or should society publishers do to enable the development of future editors in the academic realm. And I think there's a number of things that publishers can do. First, I think they can do more to help train academics to be editors. And there's lots of ways that the American Chemical Society, that's the organization with which I work, does this. For example, there's something called the American Chemical Society Reviewer Lab, which is a program for teaching people how to be good reviewers. That's a really great program that helps young people understand what it means to be a good reviewer. There's also something called the ACS on Campus. So this is a program where editors travel around the world and teach young people what's behind the screen, how it is editing works, how it is publishing works. These are really good training exercises. So training is a big part of, I think, what publishers can do, and that is being done at a number of places. But the second thing I would say is just simply support. I think we editors who are in academia really need the support of the publishing organizations to help us communicate better with authors and to do that in a way that's supportive of authors. And I think the other area of support is maybe a little more controversial, and that is to see it from our perspective. So as an academic, I don't view publishing the way you do, I don't think. To me, it's not a business. To you, it's a business, right? It's not a business to me. Okay, to me, it's all about our science. It's about research integrity, the quality of the science. It's about community engagement and service. The reason I'm an editor is to serve my community. It's not to make you money or to help us organization in a business sense. That's not why I do it as an academic, and I think that's an important distinction, a framework that I want to bring forward. So because it's not a business to us, I think there's an important thing that I think publishers need to understand, and that is if we as an academic want to be involved with you, our goals and aspirations have to align. And that alignment, I think, is really critical part of why it is and how it is that we as an academic get involved in the publishing enterprise.
Thank you, Bill. So Jasmine Wallace is peer review manager at the American Society for Microbiology. She's responsible for ensuring peer review practices and policies are up to date and applied consistently across their journals. Jasmine obtained her master's degree in publishing from the George Washington University, and she's now a teaching assistant in that program, where she helps facilitate a course on editing books, journals, and other products. She currently serves as co-chair of the Professional Development Committee for the Council of Science Editors, where she helps lead programs and services that foster the career growth of both local and global members. She's also the newest contributor to the Scholarly Kitchen, and I might add, the first person of color to be one of the permanent chefs. So Jasmine, you've given considerable thought and have written about diversity, including why you hate that term, diversity. And you've also thought and written about skills and training. Can you discuss some of the ways that scholarly publishers can take action to increase diversity and inclusion and not just keep talking about it? And how is this linked to skill development and training?
Thank you for that intro, John. Yes, I have written about diversity, and I do often struggle with the conversation around it because at times I think that the conversation is about what I am, but it's not necessarily including me. So I do tend to struggle with that conversation, and I wrote about that. But what I'd like to talk about today is just the idea of what diversity is and what inclusion is and how oftentimes they're used interchangeably. And I'm sure most of you know that they are not the same thing, but as I describe it today, I speak about diversity as a difference of perspective, a difference of bringing something new to the table, new thoughts, new ideas, new opinions. And I read a quote once, and it said that diversity is what you have, inclusion is what you do. I like to add my own twist to that today to say that diversity, yes, is what you have, but often it's what you don't have. And inclusion is what we're going to do to make it happen. So you asked me what can scholarly publishers do to take action. I'll speak specifically towards the inclusion portion because I think that's where the action is most required. I think we struggle with that as humans in general, of getting a group of people or thoughts or ideas to the table that are just not typically like our own. I think one way to address this, or one way to start to tackle this, is to really identify what your organizations or what your particular group is attempting to do. So if you are diversifying, what does that mean specifically for your group? You may not need what someone else needs. So to identify that thing and tackle that on a smaller scale, I think is a really good way to start to make people feel more included and to tackle that problem. And I say a smaller group, and I move towards inclusion because I found that within my own organization, we're doing things to tackle diversity and inclusion, and I think we're doing a great job. I think diversity is something that's really easy to do. It's about spotting areas where you need more of something that you have a lack of. But I think inclusion, again, we struggle with because how do we make the space comfortable for people to not just be there, but to offer their opinion and to provide valuable insight that they only have. I'll speak towards what I think, my organization has done a really good job at, specifically when they made these smaller groups. So we created task force. I don't think you can change committees. I don't think you can change boards. I don't think you can instantly make an effective change. But I think in small doses, you can start to break that barrier and get down to some of those problems. So we have these task force. The task force have been formulated from everyone in our organization. There's no particular, they're from every group in our organization. There's no barriers of who can be in these task force. They're not hand selected, you volunteer. And then once you volunteer, you get into these smaller spaces. And in these smaller spaces, what we do is we think of the issues that we need to tackle, the areas where we need to be more inclusive, where we need to diversify that arena. And we have very difficult conversations. I know you said that how do we move away from just talking about an issue, but I think talking about it is a very critical first step. And what happens when you're talking is to really start to highlight areas where you're going to move forward, not just talking, but developing a plan in the midst of that conversation. So for us, the specific conversation was around career and professional development. How can we increase that within our organization? How can we tackle that? How can we make people feel more inclined to even take leadership positions? We broke that down, and we decided that there were 5 major things that we want to share with the larger, we call them our senior leadership team group, to discuss on their level so that they can actually make something happen. And we talked about the need for, if you're going to bring leaders in, if you're going to try to diversify it in that way, you're going to have to equip people with this skill and this development training. You can't just put a person in a position and they're going to know automatically what they need to do. So take time to really think about, one, what you need, and as you think about what you need, how you're going to specifically address that exact problem. If you need more leaders, and in a sense, a lot of people do, or better management or skills, then think about where you're going to send these people for training. Look at the list and take a look and try to get them really involved and engaged in that way. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Jasmine. So I have a few more questions that are just going to be fielded from all of our panelists or any who choose to address the topic, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. So what are some of the key skills needed for successful leadership careers in academic publishing, in scholarly publishing over the next 10 years, both from the researcher side and editor-chief side, as well as from the publisher side? How are these skills needed today and in the coming years different from the skills when you entered the profession, or are they different? So anybody that wants to start, go ahead.
Well, maybe I'll make a quick remark. I mean, personally, I don't see that the editorials, the skills that are required to be an editor are that different than they used to be. I mean, you still have to evaluate carefully submissions and deal with the whole editorial process. That none of that has changed except for one big thing, and that's social media. And social media has changed everything. And so the work that we do as an editor now has become much more wrapped up and around all the social media efforts in a way, and I see that as being a big change from the past.
Thanks.
From the publisher perspective, I would say that what's different today is that you need to be both an expert in your respective area of publishing expertise, but you also have to be comfortable, and I would say conversant with technology and data. And certainly when I started in publishing many years ago, I just had to worry about getting the print issue out, selling some advertising, selling some reprints, and doing marketing by direct mail. So things have changed a lot because of technology. And YSG spoke at the PSP meeting recently, and it certainly caught my attention when he said that, and I agree with this, that you have to be ambidextrous in publishing and technology. And I don't expect my staff to be ambidextrous, but they should have a functional left hand or right hand, whichever one is the less dominant hand. And they need to understand the role of applications of technology to the business. And I would say that whether this is how machine learning is applied to analyzing content in the whole field around information analytics, or how technologies are applied to marketing automation and improving publishing workflows, that's something that I think is important for today's publishing professional. What I think is the same, looking back on my career, one, I tell my staff that you have to be a career-long student of the profession, and you have to have the hunger to seek out knowledge, not only within scholarly publishing, but in adjacent, and I would say completely different fields and disciplines. If you spend all of your time in this sort of small scholarly publishing bubble, at some point you're going to run out of oxygen. So you have to look to other sources for inspiration and information. One thing that I think hasn't changed as well but gets lost often is capturing the voice of the customer and keeping that top of mind. So as publishers, and I'm speaking for myself and some colleagues on my team, we tend to come up with a lot of great ideas, but then you get in a room and you talk about it and you ask, well, what does the customer want? What's the problem that we're trying to solve for the customer? And then there's this sort of period of silence, and you realize, gee, we haven't really spoken to the customer. So I think that's something that is a skill that you need that hasn't changed over the years. And then, of course, there's things like problem solving and being an innovative thinker. Those are things that are, I think, timeless.
I'll just add too, I like this idea of the lifelong learner. I think that's really critical. I'm new to the industry, and I think I'm seeing what I think I'm needing to equip myself with to move forward in the industry and people in my space. So I think in addition to what both panelists have said, I think it takes a bit of skill set that we don't really have, and that's understanding people a little bit more. I think we're moving into the knowledge era, and I think as we move towards the knowledge era, the idea of understanding the human is also kind of critical. So having a grasp of some of the things that are needed in that realm too, I think really will help make more effective change in the future. And almost as critical to what you're doing. So when you're outlining your plans, because I absolutely think, sticking to your plans is critical. Just also adding that emphasis on like getting to understand humans and behavioral things. I think that's how we have the rise of artificial intelligence. We're moving towards knowledge being key and knowledge being critical. And so just having some sort of understanding of that as well, in addition to these two things.
Maybe also to add to that in terms of those interactions, making sure to have meetings where you can build trust and being able to have a forum where you can have the artificial intelligence or machine learning to drive the field forward, but thinking beyond the areas that are trendy and building a trust with the human interaction and really having that dialogue in, trusted meeting space.
Thank you. So for all of you, what has been the role of mentorship in your career? How do young researchers and publishing professionals find effective mentors? And Karin, you mentioned to me earlier sponsors. How are sponsors different from mentors? And what are some of the steps that can and should be taken to create a successful mentorship or sponsorship program? Do you want to start?
So I was just at AACR where women in cancer research were speaking towards the need of not only having good mentors, but also good sponsors. And good sponsors would be those that would be able to advocate for their mentee or the person that they're sponsoring in a trusted position. And I've been in a fortunate position to have people that I call both mentors, but also sponsors. When I came to Cornell and wrote to this professor that led the stem cell biology class, she was really taking a chance on me. There was no guarantee that I would be able to stay in the lab for beyond the time that she offered initially, but that's also I think what sponsorship is doing is also building that trust relationship to build forward on.
Anybody else?
Mentorship has been crucial, and everything as far as my career goes. It's been my mentors that have really pushed me beyond my imagination. I think that is the role of the mentor. I wish more people would actually step out and become mentors. I volunteer for CSE, and one of the things we struggle with is getting people who are in the industry into this mentorship position. But I think it's critical to passing on your knowledge to the future so that we can ensure that it is being ran, in a way that it needs to be. I think it really helps a person get into spaces and areas where they otherwise would not necessarily be or go. And it also helps with the idea of inclusion. When you need someone to talk to because you're in a space that feels very unfamiliar, you cower. But if you have a great mentor, that's someone who says, okay, I know this is what this looks like. I know this is how this feels, but you're okay. You can do this. Let's move forward. I like this idea of sponsorship. This is a new and rising term I've heard people using, and I didn't consider it before, really thinking deeply about it, but sponsorship is really putting your neck out there. So not just saying you can do it, but saying, here's someone and I know they can do it. Again, that has been very critical to my career, and I value it. And I now serve as a mentor. I have 2 mentees, and they're in college, and I'm trying to push them forward. It's a very difficult task because oftentimes they come to you with problems that are not like your own, and you're still trying to push them while pushing yourself. But I think it's It's absolutely everything, and I challenge you, if you're not a mentor, get someone. There has to be someone in your organization that could use your advice and your knowledge, and I challenge you to share it because it's just important.
I have a different view on that whole mentor-mentee relationship in that, one, I've never been the mentee in a formal mentor-mentee relationship, and my view is that I do think that there's value in having that mentor-mentee relationship with someone in your industry or in your field of work, but I think some of the most valuable mentor-mentee relationships have occurred with someone who's completely outside of your area of business, and that relationship should be both about not only professional development but life development. So when I think about my career, I certainly learned a lot and was inspired by my managers and by my coworkers, but some of the greatest and most impactful lessons I learned were from a friend who was a very successful executive working in Asia. And what he told me is that first and foremost, you have to be loyal to yourself versus being loyal to your organization, and be passionate about what you do both in your career and what you do in life. And so his approach was, and it's something that I've adopted, is if you're managing someone and they're dissatisfied with being at your organization or working on your team, and after trying to get them to a better place, they decide that they want to leave, tell them good luck, best of wishes, leave. I'm not making you a counteroffer, because someone who's dissatisfied with their job and with their organization really doesn't add value to your organization and really isn't doing themselves a favor. So I've kind of taken that approach. I will say that the SSP mentorship program was very valuable, and in that program I served as a mentor and was able to work with someone who was frankly dissatisfied with where they were. And we had a series of meetings and conversations, and I'd like to think I gave that person guidance on how to get to a better place, both in their career and in their life.
Thank you. Did you want to add?
I mean, for me as an academic, the whole reason I'm an academic is to be a mentor. I mean, this is what it's in my blood in such a way that I don't even know how to talk about it, because that's all I do is mentor people and be involved in mentoring. And so I feel like it's so inbred in an academic that it's hard to talk about. I mean, it should extend to all other spheres of life. Yeah. And I wish it was. And for me, seeing a student who comes in with all sorts of problems and issues and lack of understanding of things turn out to be a discoverer of something significant, there's nothing better. It's an incredible thing to experience, and so it certainly would extend to publishing as well. So,
yeah, the only thing I want to add to that myself, from my own experience as both mentor and mentee, is I think a lot of us think of mentorship as like we're going to teach this person and tell them our experience, but I've found that I learn a ton also from mentees. So it's really it's really a two-way street.
that is true.
So Jasmine touched on this, but I want to widen this to everybody else, and Jasmine might add more. What has your organization done, or what practices have you participated in or are aware of in order to improve the number of diverse voices, including but not limited to women and minorities in STEM? How can we ensure that careers in scholarly publishing are accessible and include people with diverse backgrounds and perspectives? And what are some of the lessons learned in both academia and as well as publishing?
Maybe I'd like to start, actually, because it's something that I've worked at a lot in my roles as a department chair and also at the university. Something that Jasmine said really resonated with me, and I think it's really worth restating again because I think it was really right on. And that has to do with the emphasis on climate and inclusion as a means towards diversity. And I think there's a tendency in academia these days, especially, to have lots of institutional efforts that are focused on diversity. So I know every single university now has a website you can check. It's the Diversity X website that has all sorts of things that they're doing and, has all this stuff on it. Mm-hmm. But I don't think those websites do much. And I'm not sure all those institutions really have efforts. And what you talked about, I think, is really true. Is that it comes from from below. Unit activism is needed, proactive efforts, and I think it's true in publishing as well. As an editor-in-chief, I have to hire a lot of associate editors. I have to get an editorial advisory board, and I have to be very proactive to make the environment inclusive and the climate supportive. And when I do that, then I'm much more effective at bringing people on board. That's true for hiring faculty, for bringing in graduate students, for diversifying your institution, no matter what it is you have to first make the environment welcoming and make that inclusive environment proper. Then you can be successful with the diversity, which comes second. And I think that's a great point that you made, and I just wanted to say it again because I think it's spot on, Jasmine.
So I'd like to thank Jasmine as well because what you said certainly crystallized in my mind the difference between diversity and inclusion and being inclusive. ASCO recognized that that women were certainly represented well in the workforce, in the oncology workforce, but they weren't reaching the higher levels of leadership. And that's true, I think, across most of medicine. The leadership ladder sort of, not that there's a glass ceiling, but it's more difficult for women to reach those leadership positions. So ASCO actually formed and had a meeting on site where they brought together over 20 different leaders to talk about how do we be more inclusive for women, but in the context of positioning them to attain leadership positions, certainly within the organization, within ASCO. Because when we have this wall at ASCO where we have a picture of all of the past presidents, and there are, I guess, 37, 38 past presidents, and in the early years, you look at these photos and they're all white men. And then you start to see a sprinkling of women. But still, what we see is that they're underrepresented on our board of directors and certainly underrepresented as presidents for the organization. So ASCO is being very intentional about developing women. The nominating committees for board positions, we're being intentional about making sure that in a given year, we have 2 women candidates running against each other for president or another officer position within the organization. We have a working group now, part of our professional development committee, that's all about developing women in the oncology workforce. We have a networking center at our annual meeting, a blog. And this is something that I think is very simple to do for organizations, for societies and professional associations who have meetings, and you think, wow, that really has an impact, and it does. And that is, one, having childcare facilities at your annual meetings. And that was sort of a duh moment for us because what we realized were there were a lot of women who just couldn't come to the annual meeting because they had childcare responsibilities. Well, now they could travel, they could bring their child to the meeting, attend the scientific sessions, because they had a safe place where they knew their child would have care and activities. So those are some simple things that societies can do to make it more inclusive for women. If you could just, I'll say one more thing about underrepresented minorities, both from the perspective of society membership, society leadership, as well as representation in publishing. And I think what we're seeing is the pool of candidates for ASCO to select leaders for underrepresented minorities is very small. And that is just a result of certain minority groups being underrepresented in medicine in general. And until you address and fix that problem in medical school, and I'm sure this applies to other disciplines, it's going to be challenging to sort of bring those percentages up equal to what the population is in terms of minority demographics. And so this is a difficult nut to crack. We've been talking about it at ASCO. Someone said, well, we should make an attempt to go to medical schools and engage underrepresented minorities and encourage them to go into oncology. Well, in my opinion, this is my opinion, not ASCO's opinion, is that you have to start much sooner at the elementary, middle school, high school level to support and encourage underrepresented minorities to go into the STEAM or STEM fields. But I would say even for publishing, we have to figure out how do we get more underrepresented minorities to choose publishing as a career. I don't have the answers to that. We're starting an internship, a paid internship program at ASCO, but there's no guarantee that we're going to bring in or be able to choose from well-qualified individuals who represent underrepresented minorities.
Thank you. So for David and Jasmine, you're at different points in your careers. Has publishing shifted from a trade, a sort of apprenticeship that was learned mostly on the job, to more of a profession where you learn and apply a body of relevant skills and best practices? And what is the value of professional certification and advanced degrees for publishing professionals?
I'll start with this because this is something that it makes me so angry. I chose publishing. I intentionally said I chose it. I didn't stumble into it. I didn't think about it. I was an English major and I wanted to do something within the publishing world. I did not stumble into it. What I am finding, what I have found, is that most people in this profession stumbled into it by chance as they were passing through to do something completely different. But I say, I chose this profession because I believe in it. I strongly believe that it's necessary and it's critical. And at this point, it's no longer an apprenticeship style learning. No one teaches you how to do something step by step. Like, there are still aspects of that. That is the root of publishing. But I think if we really want to tackle where we're moving in publishing, we're going to have to take it seriously that we are professionals. Everyone thinks that they can be publishers, and everyone thinks they can do what we do, but it's actually a science to it. There's an art to it. There are universities and colleges offering degrees to advance yourself in this field because it's growing, and it's almost critical that we begin to take ownership of that role and say, what can we do to make better leaders for tomorrow in our industry, and not allow other industries to infiltrate us so much that we lose control of things and we lose sight of what we're trying to do, as we're attempting to catch up to everyone's expectations of what we're doing. I think if we take that on a little bit more, we'll find that we can actually use the data. We already, I'm sure everyone in this room is about making data-driven decisions, not just doing because, but doing because the numbers are there. You can't do that if you haven't studied the science of what you're doing. And yes, there are things where we can equip ourselves along the way, but at some point, I think it takes intentionally making sure that that group is being fostered. So for me, like I said, I didn't stumble. I chose, and I'm learning, and I'm going to attempt to take this industry wherever it goes. And as I learn and as I grow, I'm doing things like I started being a teaching assistant because if I'm going to be about this life, I have to truly be about this life. I have to give back and foster the development of the next people coming before me. I guess it's Gen X, Gen Z, whatever the gen is. I really think it's important. I think we should take it a little bit more serious because we don't take it serious because we're not saying, this, as you say, it's a business for us, but we don't necessarily own that business. We allow every other community to drive our decisions, and I don't think that that's always useful when we're trying to push initiatives that we know or that we can foresee happening in the future. So I don't know.
So I stumbled into publishing, and I think I still stumble in publishing. But I kind of took maybe a somewhat similar path to you. Well, certainly as an undergrad, I had no clue what publishing was. I just knew that I didn't want to become a physician, and I didn't want to kill lots of animals in the name of scientific research. Although I respected that, that wasn't what I wanted to do. And so I actually took one of the maybe first publishing courses. I thought maybe NYU's is the oldest, but I spent 4 weeks in Denver, Colorado, gaining an understanding or an overview of publishing, and it was mostly trade publishing at the time. But for me as a hiring manager, someone who has a degree or a professional certification in publishing demonstrates to me that they are committed to a career in publishing. They've invested the time and the money to be in publishing. And so, that certainly as a hiring manager would stand out for me, and I certainly would be compelled to interview that person. But once that person is on board, I still view it as an apprenticeship, depending on certainly the role that they're in. And so I think there are just certain aspects of being an editor or being a production manager or production director, managing editor that you learn through on-the-job training and being matched up with someone who has learned the craft and learned the trade. But having said that, I do think that the business is shifting to a point where you have to have professionals in your organization who have that certification and have that degree. And so at ASCO, and I would say this is not only true to the publishing program at ASCO, but our marketing department, our communications, all across the organization, we need people who know technology and who are comfortable with data. And those individuals have certifications and degrees. And I'm not saying that you have to have a college degree, because I know that there are some very accomplished people in publishing and other industries that don't have college degrees. And for me as a hiring manager, it wouldn't be a requirement, but I certainly would look at their experience and what they've accomplished.
Thank you. So for Karin and Bill, you've touched on this already, especially Bill, but what are some of the lessons for publishers from researchers? What do society publishers need to know about the researcher in order to continue the stream of publishing and the health of the ecosystem?
You want me to go first? Okay. Let me hearken back to this cultural divide between academia and the business. I think this is an interesting cultural divide where there's a lot of conflict, and I think there needs to be a lot of attention paid to that divide going forward. I'll give you an illustrative and perhaps controversial conflict point. Impact factors. Okay? As an academic, I don't care. I don't care about impact factors, and I shouldn't care. Unfortunately, I'm being made to care. Okay, and in many institutions, particularly in Asia, not in the U.S., but also happening in the U.S., more and more decisions about the quality of people's research and their careers, tenure decisions, promotion decisions, are being directed and influenced by these numbers. And it's causing academics to abdicate their responsibility to do the kind of quality control that we're supposed to be doing. And so but I understand from a business perspective, from the perspective of a publisher, impact factors are very useful. They're they're a useful metric. They're a way of understanding where you stand relative to others. But from an academic perspective, it's not useful. It's not helpful to us. It causes problems. And so there's an example where I think that we need to talk to each other better. We need to understand each other better. And I think that's at the root of a lot of these issues. The other thing I would say resonates with what you guys just said a minute ago, which was about why it is you chose to do what you do. And I maybe reflect for a second, well, why am I an editor? And as an academic, I have plenty to do. Okay, I have all the teaching, I have my research, I have my administrative job at the university. Why would I be an editor? And it relates to this whole question that came up earlier today about membership in societies. Why would you be a member of a professional society? The reason I'm an editor is because I want to serve. I want to do this for other people. I'm not doing it for me. Trust me. I wouldn't do this, okay? It's an enormous amount of effort and time that doesn't serve my purposes at all, particularly, but it's really for my community and for others. And it made me think a lot about this whole business about how you get members of professional societies. And there's a lot of talk about a value proposition and things that societies can do for their members to make them want to be members. And I think that that's backwards. I think that the way you get young people to be members of societies is you appeal to their desire to help other people. If you become a member of our society, we will have all these opportunities for you to do things for others. And in my conversations with my students, I've asked my students, why aren't you a member of the American Chemical Society? And they're like, well, I don't get anything out of it, you know. And I'm like, well, if you became a member and then you could do all these other things that would help other people, wouldn't that be great? And they're like, yeah, I'd love to do that. And so what I'm seeing is society's not focusing enough on this side of the coin. I think that's a really great way to pitch your society as a way for young people to help other people. They'll gravitate to that much more than getting a mug, a cup, a blanket, or I don't know, reduced cost to attend some meeting where they won't know anybody and wander around lost. And, you know, that's what so anyway.
Could I just build on that? So something that ASCO recognized in our market research was member engagement equals member renewal. And what we were finding is that among our early career members, there were few opportunities to actually get involved in society committees and other meaningful activities and to get credit for that engagement and involvement with the society. And so a few years ago, we stood up something called the Volunteer Corps. One of my colleagues mistakenly referred to it as the Volunteer Corps, but it's actually the Volunteer Corps. And you know, this is giving the sort of the rank and file early career members an opportunity to get involved with the society, and they would earn what we call FASCO points so that you could eventually become a fellow of the American Society of Clinical Oncology. And these could be simple activities like being part of a publishing research group or a technology research group in which, you know, your obligation would be to provide feedback, the voice of the customer, back to different groups within ASCO. Or if you review 3 papers for us in a calendar year, you would receive 1 FASCO point. And it was just creating more opportunities for younger members to become engaged with your society. So I really like what you said.
Also to elaborate a little bit more in terms of engagement and the point that Jasmine also made in terms of having data to make data-driven decisions. In terms of open access, Breast Cancer Research Foundation, BCRF, is now partnering with Springer Nature and MPJ Breast Cancer to be able to speak towards what are the effects and implications of open access. What is the value in sharing your data and sharing the raw data and doing the metadata in the appropriate way? As a scientist and as someone who went from being a cell and molecular biologist and learned bioinformatics in order to be able to analyze my own data, that open access data was incredibly valuable to me in order to be able to validate that the techniques and the scripts that I learned how to use were correct by having data validation sets. But I think being able to also interact with the investigators in terms of what are the values that would be resonating with the scientific community and how to start setting up policies that would really help in the broader community.
Thank you. I'd like to open it up to questions from the audience. I think there's some mics being passed around here. We have a question in front here.
My name is Andrew Harmon. I'm from the Endocrine Society, and I wanted to, first of all, thank you guys for this amazing insight. I also wanted to say, much like David, in relation to Jasmine, I too stumbled upon this industry. So I also wanted to say that there's a lot of, obviously the main focus here is on researchers and participants in the peer review process and publishing, but I liked what Jasmine said about the staff level of publishing, and I don't think it gets as much attention as it needs. And one thing I wish societies and publishers would do is spend a little more money to get their lower level staff people and their younger staff members to meetings like this, because there's a lot of thought leaders here, then there are a lot of directors and publisher level people here, but I don't think there are a lot of people who are like 24 and don't know much about publishing, and if nothing else could use the insight or could gain something from the insight that people here provide. But also I would like to ask Jasmine, I know David, you kind of, you touched on this, but Jasmine, this talk of the efforts for discussing diversity and then inclusion as the driver of those aims that you seek through talk of diversity. Is there any of that at ASM as far as the staff level, not just the researcher level or the society member level?
There's a ton of it, and you actually talked about something that we're also doing as well. We are, our human resources department has taken note of what you're describing as this idea of there needing to be an intention about our staff and developing the managers within and the leadership team within. So just to highlight that, that's something that we're doing as well. So they're taking this really serious because they think in order for us to equip our members, we need to be more equipped as staff. So they're doing a lot to drive those things. We have, like I said, we have task force, and the task force come together from just everyone being able to sort of volunteer. They don't really handpick anyone, and typically the people that join the task force are people who are underrepresented in the higher level groups. So I think that is a really great way that they have started to do that. So yes, they do. They are doing that, and they have taken that into consideration. And I think that's something that a lot of other organizations can start to do to try to make that shift into being more inclusive.
Hi, Hannah Heckner at AAAS Science. As it is Society Day, I thought it would be great to get your input on how you think so at least at AAAS, we have one HR department that staffs everyone at the association, including folks working for Science Magazine. And obviously, when you're hiring someone in a program, it's very different from hiring a journal associate position. So what do you see as the most important things for talent acquisition and retention for publishing groups within nonprofit associations? And John, it would be great to get your take on this as well.
I think I'll let David start, though.
Yeah. Well, it's a tough question. Talent acquisition and retention. So, at ASCO, we do have a retention program that is top down from leadership. And so one of the things that I am and other managers and directors are encouraged to do is to have just one-on-one, what we call retention lunches with staff. So I, as a vice president of my team, don't get to interact on a day-to-day basis with the junior members of my staff, but I ask my admin every year, schedule a one-on-one lunch with members of my team from top to bottom. And I go out to lunch with them, and I say, we can talk about whatever you want. So I guess it's sort of a very informal ad hoc mentorship program, but I say, we can talk about whatever you want, whether it's something if you want to talk about your personal hobby or how you got into publishing. And it just demonstrates that there is an interest in them as a person and interest in their career, if that's what they want to talk about. I mentioned the mentorship program that we have. But I think what we could do better, though, as an organization is that whole sort of maybe recruitment process and making it known to colleges and universities that we are an employer of choice. Why should you work for ASCO? I mean, I think we're a great organization, but perhaps we don't do that well enough. And perhaps as an industry, we need to be better at telling prospective talent why they should work at our organizations. Something, again, YSG said was, they've had to adjust to compete for tech talent. They've had to adjust their compensation. And, being a father of someone who graduated 2 years from college, he had no clue about publishing, had no interest in publishing. And when I told him what salary I started out at 20 years ago, he said, "Oh God, I'm sorry." So I think we as an industry need to position and sell our industry and what we do, and to convey passion about what we do and why this is a great field to be working in.
If I might resonate and say that from the other side, I think as a professor, as someone who mentors a lot of students who are out on the job market, I don't hear enough from you. What it is, I think a lot of my students would be very interested in a career in science publishing, and for AAAS in particular. But I don't know about the job openings. There's no recruitment efforts that are directed at universities and at professors who have active research groups, who have students who would be the type of students who might go into the field. So I agree. I think a more active reaching out to the academic community would really be helpful.
So I think there's a lot of different ways to look at this. So I'll just mention a few. In my program, I get students like Jasmine who kind of always wanted to be in publishing, some that are working in publishing that come into the program. And I do give them some talk about careers and, career search. And, I ask them to look at not only like what their strengths are, but what their values are, and what really drives your long-term career satisfaction. I think is not necessarily salary. Like, I wouldn't have been in this business for salary. But I found it really rewarding, and so I try to express some of that. And I think also we all recognize now, which is different than the past, that you're not just going to work like one job and just be in one place. So recognizing that that's okay. I think I remember one of the last people I hired at George Mason University. I was like, I don't expect you to be here forever, or even necessarily 5 years. I want you to be happy while you're here. I want you to grow. And I'm going to be glad when you leave, if you leave to something better. I'm going to be disappointed if you leave because you're not satisfied here. And so I think that's one way to look at it. It's not a bad thing, but certainly, it's also costly to hire people and have them leave. And again, you don't want people to leave because they're not satisfied. So making sure, I think the obvious things like that you recognize people. There's a lot of different ways of recognizing people and rewarding people and encouraging things like Jasmine mentioned, going to conferences. I think different associations do a better or not so good job. Some do. Maybe I shouldn't say this, but I know an association in publishing that I'm associated with that has scholarships for young people to come and attend, and I think things like that are really important. And just having the career growth and support networks, and I think again mentorship really helps with that too. Making sure you have, I think some accidental mentorships are great, but having a formal mentorship program is also good, and it's not really a either or situation. So I could go on and on about this, obviously.
I would also just like to say that, at the end of the day, compensation is important for a lot of people. And, as an organization, we've made sure that we are competitive in the job market, and being in the DC area, there's a lot of competition for talent. So we have made sure that we have data on, how our salaries, our compensation compares to, other organizations. We've created what we call job families within the organization. So, publishing, technology, policy and advocacy, marketing, et cetera. And we have adjusted salaries accordingly. If someone is, below the benchmark within a job family, surprise, your salary is going to be adjusted so that you're, at the right level. So I think that's important. And what I hear from, what I've read in research is that maybe countering what I just said is that it's not always about compensation and salary, but just feeling like you are growing and that you're being developed, that you're learning. That's important. And so we do try to send as many individuals to industry-related meetings, CSE, SSP, etc.
There was a challenge before to identify mentees, and I would like to, in addition to that, also encourage those that you interact with or mentor to also respond to, for instance, informational interviews. I transitioned into my position only in September, and one thing that I did that I found extremely helpful was to ask people for a cup of coffee, really to be able to understand the different industries that I was considering and know that the career path that you choose is right for you and really where you want to see yourself long term. And that's one excellent way of being able to reach a broader impact is now to.
That's great that you mentioned that too, because I tell my students to do that, and most of them have never heard of that concept. So,
Could you suffer through one more comment? Maybe this will be like me getting up on a soapbox, but I think it addresses some of the comments from my co-panelists, and certainly the question around how publishers and researchers can work better together and how all stakeholders can work better together. And I think there is a lack of understanding among many researchers about what publishers actually do, the value we add, and the cost of high-quality scholarly publishing. And so I think as a result, the discourse around publishing and open access publishing in particular is very much like the political discourse in the U.S. It's misinformed, it's contentious, it's siloed, very polarized. And I don't blame the researchers for not understanding what publishing is and what it entails. I actually blame the publishers for not communicating to the researchers what it is that we do. And I think as publishers, we need to, as you said, have a cup of coffee with open access advocates and to understand what drives their fire and passion, and a lot less of, and I'm guilty of this, sort of the snarky in dialogue on Twitter. I've tried to remove myself from that, but I think if we have more of those one-on-one conversations or small group conversations face to face, perhaps we can come to a better place.
Now, there's a panel discussion.
Yeah. So we have, I think, time for one more question.
In light of the time, I'll make more of a statement and you can respond to it or not. And I just wanted to point out in discussions of diversity, what we haven't heard very much is geographic diversity. And looking at other continents outside of the northeast sector of the globe, there are a huge number of challenges there in developing leaders and collaborators. And when you look at what's happening in science, which is becoming more interdisciplinary, more international, with lots of challenges, having leaders that are well-informed and that are not just bicultural and bilingual, but multicultural and multilingual, I think is a really important part of building leadership into the future. So that's just a statement. I know everybody's hungry, so.
Well, I want to thank our great panelists here, David, Jasmine, Bill, and Karin. Thank you for your perspectives. It's been very interesting from my viewpoint here.